The dust has finally settled on the Prime League 2026 Winter Snowdown, and what we witnessed in that grand final was a masterclass in why League of Legends is often called human chess. G2 Nord versus Big went the distance, a full 5-game series that essentially served as a blueprint for the current European regional meta. It's fascinating because on paper, you look at the stats and see Big dominating early in several games, but the final scoreline tells a different story. It raises the question of how a team can be down 10,000 gold and still walk away with the trophy.
It really comes down to the fundamental divide between micro-mechanics and macro-strategy. In the context of the Winter Snowdown, which is the kickoff tournament for the Prime League in the DACH region, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, the stakes were incredibly high. We're talking about a €12,500 prize pool and massive reputation on the line for these accredited European regional league teams. G2 Nord entered as the invited heavyweights, while Big fought through the qualifiers. What we saw over those 5 games was Big showing some of the best individual mechanical skill in the league, but G2 Nord proving that at the highest level, map awareness and objective control are the true kings of the Rift.
You mentioned that distinction between micro and macro, and Game 1 was perhaps the most jarring example of that conflict. Big came out of the gate swinging. Their jungler Hababu on Kiana was everywhere. They built this massive lead, roughly 14,000 gold up at one point, and held 10 towers to G2's 4. In any standard solo queue game, that's a surrender at 20 minutes. Yet G2 Nord held on for nearly 30 minutes and actually won. How does a professional team fail to close out a game with a lead that substantial?
It was a failure of coordination in the transition from mid to late game. Big had the micro down. They were winning the duels and hitting the skill shots. Hababu's Kiana was sitting at 7-1-9, which is terrifying. But as the game progressed, their team fight positioning, especially on Funk 3's Caitlyn, started to falter. Caitlyn is a champion that relies on perfect spacing to survive, and G2 Nord exploited that. Despite Toasty and Rin having rough starts on Azir and Corki, G2's composition was built for the long haul. They used Rek'Sai and Skarner as these inevitable engage tools. Once G2 secured the vision around the Baron Pit, they forced Big into uncomfortable face checks. It's a classic lesson. Gold buys items, but it doesn't buy vision or discipline.
It felt like G2 Nord took that momentum into Game 2, but they didn't just wait for Big to mess up this time. They were proactive. The draft shifted significantly, with G2 picking up Sion and Malphite. That feels like a very specific statement on how they wanted to control the pace.
That was a protect the carry masterstroke. By putting Shelfmate on Sion and Marcoon on Malphite, they created this impenetrable wall. This allowed Rin's Kai'Sa to absolutely snowball, finishing 12-1-5. This game was a stark contrast to the first, because G2 didn't just out-macro Big, they dominated the map from the jump. They controlled every single dragon, which is a massive macro failure for Big. In professional league, if you give up that much objective priority, you're essentially putting yourself on a timer. Big's Jason Echo picks were meant to create side lane pressure, but they were constantly forced to react to G2's movements rather than making plays of their own.
Then we hit Game 3, which was the marathon of the series, almost 40 minutes. Again, Big is ahead on gold, ahead on towers, and yet they can't cross the finish line. There was a moment where Zeri, played by FunK3, looked like she was going to 1v9 the game. She was 12-4-7. What kept G2 in it during those late game sieges?
The Wombat combo is the short answer. G2 had Orianna, Sivir, and Dr. Mundo. Even when Big had the raw damage with Zeri and Senna, G2's ability to layer their ultimates was superior. Think of it like this. Big had 5 great players, but G2 had 1 cohesive unit. Every time Big tried to split push or force an awkward engage, G2 punished them with vision traps. There's a reason why high-level coaches emphasize warding so much. In those late-game scenarios, if you lose track of the enemy jungler for even 5 seconds, your entire lead can vanish. Big's positioning in the river was their undoing. They got picked off one by one, won, and G2 just marched down mid with the Baron buff.
It's interesting you mentioned the one cohesive unit, because BIG did manage to bite back. They didn't roll over. By game 4, the pressure was at an all-time high. G2 tried to go for a more aggressive, mobile draft with Yone and Ezreal, but BIG seemed to find a rhythm with an Ornn and Syndra core. It felt like BIG finally figured out how to use their front line to actually protect their carries.
BIG's Game 4 was a glimpse of what they are capable of when their macro aligns with their micro. They used Syndra's Scatter the Weak and Ornn's Forge God Bellows to dictate where the fights happened. However, even in their loss, G2's support player Takimoto showed why Karma is such a priority pick. The amount of peel, which for those new to the game is just the act of protecting your vulnerable damage dealers, he provided was insane. He kept Ezreal and Yone alive through situations they had no business surviving. But ultimately, BIG's Aatrox and Lucian snowball was too much to overcome. It forced a Game 5, which is exactly what every fan wants to see in a grand final.
Game 5, Silver scrapes everything on the line. G2 Nord goes for Gragas, Vi, Ahri, Tristana, and Milio. That looks like a very safe professional draft. Lots of disengage, lots of reliable crowd control. On the other side, Big went for a Swain mid and a Viego jungle. That's a high-risk, high-reward setup.
It really was a clash of philosophies. Big was betting on resets, the idea that if they get one kill, Viego and Swain can just run through the entire team. G2 Nord, however, played with incredible maturity. They didn't chase kills, they played the map. Rin's Tristana was the star here, going 10-2-3. But the real unsung hero was the Milio pick. In those chaotic teamfights, Milio's ultimate, Breath of Life, completely nullifies the engaged potential of a champion like Braum or Kennen. Big tried to force the issue multiple times, but G2 just stayed disciplined. They waited for the Baron, they waited for their power spikes, and they closed the series with clinical efficiency.
When we look back at the tournament as a whole, it wasn't just about this final match. We saw teams like Eintracht Frankfurt and AWE Einfach making deep runs, but G2 Nord and Big were clearly a tier above. What is it about the German regional scene right now that's producing this level of tactical depth? We're seeing over 50% German players, but also a huge influx of talent from Denmark, France, and Poland.
The Prime League has become a vital proving ground. It's an accredited league, which means it's a direct pipeline to the LEC, the top flight of European league. Organizations like G2 are investing in these Nord Academy-style teams because they want to scout and develop the next generation of stars. This tournament showed that the gap between good and elite isn't just about how fast you can click. It's about how you handle pressure in a best-of-5. Big's early game leads throughout the series suggest they might actually be mechanically superior to G2 Nord in a vacuum. But in a competitive environment, G2's ability to adapt their drafts and stay calm when they were 10,000 gold down is what won them the trophy.
For a casual viewer or someone just getting into esports, what's the big takeaway here? Is it that you should stop worrying about your KDA and start looking at the minimap more?
Precisely. If there's one lesson from this grand final, it's that kills don't win games. Nexus destructions do. You can be 7-0 on Kiana, but if you're not turning those kills into Dragons, Towers, or Baron buffs, you're just inflating your stats while the enemy team is winning the war. G2 Nord won because they understood the win conditions of their team composition better than Big did. They knew they could lose the early game as long as they didn't lose their cool. They prioritized peel for their carries and focused on objective timing. For any aspiring pro, this series is a case study in resilience and strategic depth.
It also highlights the importance of the draft. In almost every game, G2 Nord's adjustments between matches seem to directly address whatever Big had done well the game before. That's a testament to the coaching staff and the veteran presence on the team.
The coaching battle is often invisible to the fans, but in a B5, it's half the struggle. G2's flexibility was their greatest weapon. They could play the heavy frontline style of Game 2 or the high mobility scaling style of Game 5. Big conversely seemed to double down on aggression even when it wasn't working. It's that old saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Big tried to hammer their way through G2's defense, but G2 just kept shifting the shape of the wall. It was a brilliant series that really validates why the Prime League is such a cornerstone of the European scene.
As we look toward the rest of the 2026 season, G2 Nord has established themselves as the team to beat. They've got the trophy, the lion's share of the prize pool, and the momentum. But Big has shown they have the raw firepower to compete. If they can shore up those mid-game macro transitions, the rematch is going to be even more explosive.
The potential for growth in Big is massive. They have the mechanics that you simply can't teach. Macro, on the other hand, can be learned through review and discipline. G2 Nord is the finished product right now, but the season is long. This winter Snowdown was just the kickoff, and if this is the level of play we're starting with, 2026 is going to be a landmark year for European League of Legends. From the diversity of the player base to the strategic evolution of the teams, the Prime League is proving that regional esports is where the most exciting narratives are actually being written.
It's a reminder that even in a digital game, the human element, the ability to stay calm under the lights and make the right call when your screen is gray, is what separates the champions from the runners-up. G2 Nord are your Winter Snowdown champions, and they earned every bit of it through patience and superior vision.
And for anyone listening who wants to climb the ranks themselves, go back and watch Rin's positioning on Kai'Sa and Tristana. That is how you carry a game. Not by diving in 1v5, but by trusting your front line and maximizing your damage from safety. It was a spectacular series to analyze.
That's a wrap on our deep dive into the 2026 Winter Snowdown Grand Final. It's been an incredible journey through the tactical nuances of the Prime League. If you found this analysis helpful for your own games or just enjoyed the breakdown of the high-level strategy, consider sharing this episode with a friend who's looking to level up their understanding of the Rift.